This channel is made possible through the support of generous listeners just like you. If you would like to be a part of helping us bring our message of hope, peace, love, and spiritual truth to the world, please consider heading to experienceofthesoul.com/support, where you can join us as an ongoing patron or simply make a one-time gift. Blessings on the journey, dear friend.
Natural Awakenings Magazine and Zen Living Realty present The Authentic Spiritual Journey, a weekly show featuring real and practical spiritual conversations from diverse perspectives here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. Today, episode 114, our conversation with Dr. Michael Conforti. And now your host, Reverend Cynthia Alice Anderson.
Hello and welcome to the Authentic Spiritual Journey. My name is Cynthia Alice Anderson. I am the host, and I am so happy to be back today in 818 Studios with my producer.
Hello, everybody. This is Dave Croft. Thank you so much for joining us for show number 114 of the Authentic Spiritual Journey. And Cynthia Alice, it is brilliant to have you back in 818 Studios again.
Yeah, happy to be here in the house. And we're so honored that you're joining us. And we're so proud because, again, we're in over 70 countries all around the world. And we just thank you for your support of our program. And we're here, to support you, to lift you up, to provide you with inspiring programs, but also programs that help you go deeper into your soul work. And today is no exception. We have a wonderful guest in our studio. Of course, he's joining us remotely, and his name is Dr. Michael Conforti of the Assisi Institute. So yay. Thank you, Dr. Conforti, for being with us.
My pleasure.
Well, I want to have you lead out right away. I want to tell our listeners, though, that I have you on the show for a number of reasons. And one reason is because of the way you teach and talk about the soul. It's from a different perspective than what I do, but what I want our listeners to know is that your work continues to illuminate my own personal process and the way I see the world. So we're glad you're here.
Well, thank you for the compliments. And it really is a pleasure. I mean, to hear you have 114 shows in 70 countries, my God, it's a tremendous reach you have.
Mm-hmm.
So glad to be part of it.
So tell us a little bit about your journey. I want to hear. I know you had a story, and I felt like we should just start right out with that.
Well, life, I think, is a lot about stories.
Yeah,
and you could begin with a lot of intellectual things and whatever. There's something about a story that's compelling. And then I find it to be true. And a few people have said, yes, you love scholarship and all, but also you're a storyteller. Mm-hmm. And I never thought of myself that way, but I do find stories reveal so much about our life. I'll begin with two pieces. One, somewhat personal, the other personal/professional. I'm 100% Italian, and we grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And my father's side of the family, they're from Sicily, which is a whole world unto itself.
Yes.
Some people don't even call them Italians or Sicilian people. The other side is from Naples, about 20 miles away. And there's still two different worlds. I remember growing up loving being in my grandparents' home on both sides. And both are very different, though. One, my paternal grandfather and grandmother, it was still like being in a little village in Sicily. Mm-hmm. The language was different. The aromas of the house were different. Like they would say, "Ma che bello picciolino, che bello, che bello picciolino," which means it's to say, "What a beautiful little boy, beautiful little girl." And my other grandparents would say, "Ma che bello ragazzo." And as a kid, I was 2, 3 years old. I didn't even, you knew it was a compliment or whatever they were talking to. But there was something about the sounds of the word that captivated me. Mm. And I knew they were different. Mm-hmm. And, clearly, I'm not trying to infer this is great insight as a child. That's not the point. No child prodigy or anything like that. But I was aware that certain things were being conveyed by the different sounds. Mm-hmm. And I pursued this, for the past 20 years. And now I lecture in Italian and actually just gave a talk virtually in Catania. And I did the first part in Sicilian. And it was I loved it. And you talk about soul, authentic soul experiences. It was a soul experience. It was soul to go back to an old world and use words that I heard growing up and my father heard growing up. My father, by the way, tomorrow is 104 years old.
Unbelievable.
Wow. 104.
Well,
Okay.
if his age is any indication of you and your work, you're going to be here for years to come.
Well, for my students, that can be good news or bad news, depending on my impact.
Well,
Well, that's one part of this. The second part of the story is something that will also be with me for the rest of my life. Now, you may remember that back in the 70s, there was a school for developmentally delayed children in New York called Willowbrook State School. Geraldo Rivera was really cutting his teeth at that point, and he found this story and he really dug into it, and he did an expose on it. And I was living maybe 3 miles away
mm,
in one of the outer boroughs of New York. We moved from Brooklyn to Staten Island, and this is on Staten Island, and he brought his camera crews in to find conditions of squalor. I mean, these poor kids were left there.
mm,
I don't even want to say, you can imagine, or you don't want to imagine what they were living in, these poor kids.
mm-hmm.
And I was going to City University in New York, and I said, I would love the experience of some kind of internship in psychology. And I went there, and while some are prepared by reading Geraldo's book on this, you're never prepared to see this.
Yeah.
I mean, what you want to say, kids that are 30, 40, 50 years old that are, maybe 4 feet tall and the vocabulary of 5 or 6 words.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two parts of what happened there. One was, I remember with this one guy, he was probably 45 years old. And one day, it's one of those incredible sunsets. Mm. And you look and you're doing your work, you're helping kids and maybe trying to throw a ball around or picking up stuff off the floor, whatever. And the sunset just called to you. You had to watch it. And I had the little boy, I put my arm around him, which you could do back then, put my arm around him. And I said, and he just brought him over to me. And I wondered, what's he saying? He couldn't talk.
Sure.
What's he saying? And I had a thought that day, and a thought that had nothing to do with the world I lived in, nothing with the way my mind and my psyche worked. Things that come out of nowhere. And some people call it a sense of the Holy Ghost, because the Holy Ghost comes in sort of flickers of inspiration out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a flicker out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I thought, you know what? I left that day thinking, what did he see? What did he feel? And I thought, if we can only create a machine, which we probably have today, that could read his brain pattern as he's watching this, and translate the brain pattern into words. And I'm looking to say, who said that? Because that's not me. Computers, I still barely use computers. I had a flip phone until 2 years ago. I'm going back. I was 18 years old, and I'm 68 right now, a long time ago. And it came out of nowhere. Yes. So to see how we experience. The second part of that story was, these kids were prisoners. Yeah. I mean, they would sit up and bang their heads against the rubber mats and whatever. And anyway, I was there during the summer months, and they would always give the kids half an hour of recess. Mm-hmm. And they would open the doors, and some of them would walk out, crawl out, wheelchair out, whatever. And this one little kid who would spend the whole day, rocking in a corner of a room. He ran out, and he did the same thing every day. He ran over to the flower garden, and this is a God's honest truth. He would pick some flowers, and he would make a crown out of it and put it on his head.
Oh, wow.
Cynthia, I swear to God, that kid was different for that half hour. Mm. And, to this day, I who knows really what happened, but I can tell you he entered something. I think sort of a preamble for how I got into the work on fields, which we're talking about. Right. But he entered some other domain where he was trained for that 30 minutes. He was, terrible language, he was a regular little boy. He wasn't plagued by all these, whatever he was plagued by, whatever neurological, physiological, psychological disabilities. He was a kid playing and ecstatic.
Yeah, it was like a moment of spiritual awakening, like every day at that time.
Yes. And, that experience stays with me. And I think when I begin think about these different fields we enter in our life, that's what I saw firsthand at that day. That's what I felt at the homes of my two grandparents. I entered something with its own tradition, its own contours, its own language, and something happens. Mm-hmm. Something happens. I mean, prayer, look, this is a world you live in, and I participate in my own way. And prayer is a conscious alignment to something.
Yes.
saying, whether praying to St. Francis, St. Clair, whatever one might be. It's consciously aligning yourself to whatever these transpersonal influences are. And those two stories are ways that I could begin sharing with you how, so the early experience of what I would say are deeply spiritual attitudes and immersions.
Yes, yes, I agree. And, some of the things you've already mentioned to some of our listeners might be brand new. I think you mentioned archetypal patterns, you mentioned fields, and you even have a book called Field, Form, and Fate. So, talk a little bit about fields. What do you mean when you say fields?
Well, okay. I think we've all experienced times in our life when we enter something,
Uh huh.
whether it might be that incredibly romantic mood by the fireplace and the bubbly's out and the flowers are out and you're listening to Andrea
Uh huh.
Bocelli, right? And you forget thinking.
Right.
It's just a wonderful ambiance. Other moments you feel it, you know what? You can get a bat. Now I'm from Brooklyn, right? So this language fits Brooklyn. You can get a bat if you're really mad and you go after somebody. And you say, whoa, 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 what happened? What came over? What befell me? What came over me? And other times you're walking and you just have the sense of a union with everything around you.
Mm-hmm.
So people pronounce agape, and you're connected to something grand. And you say, whoa, what happened? I know I just walked into this pine grove. I just walked by the ocean. I'm fishing. Not that it's space-time, located in space and time, but you wonder what happened. And I realized after a number of years working with this, there clearly are all these different domains in life.
Mm-hmm.
From birth to, you have a child, you know what it's like,
Mm-hmm.
the incredible emotions of love where you give your life for him in a heartbeat, where some point you say, oh my God, give me a day off from it's just too much. And you find yourself inundated by these emotions, generative and non-generative.
Mm-hmm.
They take over.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was looking at this, one of the ways I got there was my work in initial interviews, first session in therapy, consulting an organization. And you found that something happened when you began a new initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And something seemingly preformed and prefigured began to spin and take both people into it. And you realize, much like the force of gravity with gravitational fields, you're suddenly drawn into it. The field of electromagnetism, you're drawn into that magnetic hold of something.
Mm-hmm.
Watching iron filing. So it seemed to be the same with human, that we're brought into things, whether the domain of the divine and the ecstatic, whether in the domain of diabolic. Both are there,
Mm-hmm.
and they seem to have the power to consume, to transform, and to structure activities in life. And that's been my work for the past 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. And the depth of the work is really intense. The depth seems to have never-ending aspects. So that as you're looking at whether you're going back and looking at a trauma, whether you're kind of pulling apart, whatever happened in a certain meeting with another person to, relational issues, the what can be learned, what can be known by, as you're saying, studying the field seems to be never ending. And because there are so many layers to the learning, it seems to me.
It's never ending, and also the learning and the appreciation for the different fields. Not a great analogy, but you think of like a radio tuner. You tune into jazz, to rock, to
Right.
classical, to whatever,
Right.
and it's somewhat it's never ending series of genres, But it's incredible when you can begin to hear the different tones.
Yeah.
To say, I think I'm just stepping into this kind of the field of whatever. And you begin then to understand why these particular emotions. And you find that there's a constituent emotion that go with different fields. Becoming a mother, right? There are emotions that sometimes just come out of the blue and you realize, whoa. Yeah, those are emotions of a new mama.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yes. Yes.
The emotion of watching your boy grow up and realizing there's a loved person in the picture for them. It's not just mama anymore.
Right.
And
Right.
eventually they want the keys to the car and a credit card for a lot of gas. And eventually say, you know what, I'll see you in a weekend, mom.
Yeah, exactly.
And
It's like,
all the
I'm out of
emotions
here. Yeah.
you're getting closer to that.
Yes. Yes. Right. So,
And
so say more about because so many of our listeners are in a healing process, in a healing journey. We have so many people that have that are in recovery from addiction. We have so many people that have been on a spiritual journey for many years and have kind of given up on more traditional, what we would call traditional religion, and have moved more into a place of spiritual and wanting spiritual experiences, and are seeking to know the divine on a regular basis. And these moments that you're speaking of transformation, of I know that word is so overused today, but maybe even transpersonal experiences that that people are having. So I want you to say more about when we have trauma, and how when things get constellated, which is also, I guess, a field of trauma, it would be, then how do they start to recognize what those things are, and then move out of that into healing? I just want to make sure at some point, it doesn't have to be now, that we get to some of the aspects of.
No, I would love to. It's a wonderful question, and it's it kind of quiets me for a moment because it's a profound question and issue. It's a life issue. And it's interesting. I'm reading one of our students' papers right now.
Mm.
To graduate, you have to do a thesis, and it's a story about locked-in syndrome, and the story of three individuals that had this, and the issue of resilience in the human soul.
Yeah.
I mean, to begin with that, I mean, resilience is something we can never fully understand. Some people say it's an experience of grace.
Mm-hmm.
How resilience comes into our life, and how after all you've been through, you can still have love in your life. I mean, look, you've been around long enough. Some people come from very, very rough experiences, from physical violence to abandonment to death, mutilations, and they make a life. And you think, how? I mean, in some ways, I think it's true to say that's not humanly possible, but it's divinely possible when we connect to something greater.
Yeah.
So part of the first comment I'll make, then I'll build from there, is resilience is one of the greatest gifts, and something we should hopefully never stop striving for. Yeah. My son got a tattoo about 8 years ago. He said, "Dad, I got to tell you, I got a tattoo." I said, "It's okay, And what is it? Over his chest, it said Benedetto. Benedetto is Italian for blessed, which is my father's middle name.
Oh, wow.
And he said, I know Grandpa's story. It's not all great. No one's got all great story. He said, but what I love is his resilience. My father, with one eye, one leg, not seeing well out of the one eye, he never stopped.
Yeah.
Never stopped. 100 up until 100, he cooked for half the neighborhood. And he said, I love that, Dad. And that I want as a totem in my life, that kind of resilience.
Benedetto.
So, what's that?
And the word is Benedetto?
Benedetto. Yeah. Benedetto means well said, which is really a blessing.
Yeah.
Benedizione, Benedetto. But the next part of that is where it's difficult. And you're right. Transformation is way overused, as is many times spirituality.
Yes.
I've often thought, I want to write an article. If only God wasn't made of Teflon. No, if God was made of Teflon. Because all of our projections stick, right? From the Crusades, God wants us to kill the infidels. God wants us to kill the redheads and the blonde, but not the, or God wants us.
Yeah.
And we project a lot of things. And for Jung, there was a huge difference. And it was one of the wonderful things he said about religion, spirituality. He said spirituality is very different from religion.
Yes.
Because spiritual, for Jung, anyway, I think it's accurate. It's a direct experience of something greater, of the sacred.
Yes.
So the next part of it, when you talk about trauma, which is something I've been involved in for many, many years, it's, whether you talk about it like St. John, the dark night of the cross, in alchemy, the darkening, or the Nigredo, there are many myths and stories about going into the darkness.
Yes.
And it's very tough. Look, as an analyst for 40 years, I'll tell you, the work of resilience is archetypal. The work of denial is archetypal, in the sense that it's part of the human condition. We will deny with the best of them. We'll deny like fish swim, because it's so painful. I mean,
it's so hard to look at it. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a regularity in human condition, and that's not a criticism. It's an observation.
Yes. Yes.
So, for somebody to want to hopefully get and be blessed by resilience, and resilience find a way to knock on that door and they open up or whatever. I think part of the work is being able to face the horrors of two parts now. It's two parts, in my opinion. Number one is what's been done to us.
Mm-hmm.
The violence, the horror, the abandonments, whatever. The second part, which is even more difficult, is what we've done to others as a result of what we've been through.
Yes.
Many therapies, I would say many therapies, pastoral counseling, from psychoanalysis on to humanistic, the language is, oh, you're too hard on yourself. Oh, you're too hard on yourself. You just because you're a victim, that's why you did it. Because that happened to you, that's why you do it to your own kids. Well, you know what? I don't think that matters to the soul on some level. Yes, of course, we've been through terrible things, and it makes sense. It's like a linear, straight line. It was done to you, you do to your own kids. And we all have regrets. I mean, there's no parent that doesn't put money in the therapy jar every day for our kids, every week,
Right.
But if you can then face, oh my God, what happened to me as a kid, some of the atrocities happened to me in different dimensions, but we perpetrate some of that on our own kids.
Exactly. And I want to talk a little bit more about that when we come back, which, the way I speak of that is just breaking the cycle. I want to talk about that. I want to talk a little bit about projection, if you don't mind, because that's such a great Jungian teaching. And also, before you leave, I want to hear a little more about what's coming up at Assisi. So we'll be right back after these brief messages.
We'll return to the program in just a few moments, but first, we wanted to give a special word of thanks to our podcast partner, Natural Awakenings Magazine of Central Florida, Greater Orlando. Each month, Natural Awakenings magazines across the country take a practical look at the latest natural approaches to nutrition, fitness, creative expression, personal growth, and sustainable living. Natural Awakenings magazine is a free publication and is available in selected stores, health and education centers, healing centers, public libraries, and wherever free publications are located. You could learn more, including advertising opportunities for your business, by calling 407-628-0705. We'd also like to extend our special thanks to Zen Living Realty. Zen Living Realty's mission is to mindfully serve, connect, and positively impact their customers, partners, and community through their Zen approach to real estate. Their vision is to be the most trusted real estate brokerage in the Central Florida area. You can reach Zen Living Realty at zenlivingrealty.com or call 407-800-2717. And now we return you to this week's episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey with your host, Reverend Cynthia Alice Anderson.
So welcome back. We're glad you're with us. We're really fortunate. We are really blessed to have Dr. Michael Conforti with us of Assisi Institute. And he shared with us in the first half that he's been an analyst for over 40 years. That's pretty amazing. And the life lessons, the wisdom that he has to share is wonderful. So we're glad to have you, Dr. Conforti. And I do want to get right back into, breaking that cycle, which in my view is when the soul really begins to heal. So I loved what you said about, not saying, well, I'm doing this because of what was done to me. Because the fact is, as souls, every day is a choice. Every day is an opportunity for healing, for resilience, for awakening. And this is what we believe is that what I teach is that we are 100% responsible for our lives and the way we live those lives. So I want to hear more about what you have to say about breaking the cycle. And again, if we have time to move into a little bit about projection, because it's all related, right? What we're saying.
No, I definitely. Right before the break, you talked about breaking the cycle.
Yeah.
And let me give a little example. In Italy, a number of years ago, we do a conference in Italy every year for 31 years now. And I was lecturing about fields, this stuff we're talking about. And a colleague said, well, why don't we just change what we feel about things? Now, I'm talking about FIELD, my work on fields, FIELD.
Right.
And he's talking about feelings. So why don't we just change our attitudes of feeling? And I said, let me give you an example. Imagine you have some iron filings on the table and you got a magnet underneath it. Why don't you just tell the iron filings not to respond to that magnet?
Right.
He said, oh my God, it never dawned on me. I said, man, most of us don't. And that's the point. That the power of archetypes, Jung said the power of archetypes are much of what structured the atrocities of the whole Nazi uprising. Mm-hmm. There's an archetype of war that comes over. There's an archetype of beneficence that comes over. So anyway, talk about breaking the cycle. It's a lot more difficult than it because these cycles are real.
Yeah.
Say to somebody, well, break the sugar cycle. You're in an insulin, low insulin cycle right now. Your sugar's spiking really high. You got a hyperglycemic low. Just change your cycle by thinking, well, maybe. I know there's a lot of good stuff happening around these kind of biofeedback practices and the mind-body things where you change things. But, for many of us, we're not there. Okay. So it's not that simple. So one big piece where it ties into a lot of your work in spirituality is to realize there are fields and influences at times a lot stronger than me. I mean, is that any different from a spiritual attitude? I don't think so. To say, my God, let's say somebody who's been an alcoholic for many years, say an alcoholic for 20 years and the ravages in their family. And the moment of insight comes, say, oh my God, I had no idea how I was so out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're out of control, you don't have control. We can't just say, I'm going to pull out of it today. I'm going to pull out of the skid. I'm going to turn the car off, turn it on, whatever. That's the power, Cynthia, about this stuff. It literally consumes and eclipses consciousness and discernment when you're in this thing, like those iron filings.
Yes.
So number one, when you realize, oh my God, I'm in something that's bigger than me. There's the power and capacity to structure my emotion and govern what I do. That's number one, the beginning, I would say, of a spiritual attitude.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different from the words in AA and a lot of it. But anyway, so then talk about somebody who's going through this experience, some of your listeners. Let's say you've been an alcoholic 20 years, right? You look at the ravages of your family, from mortgage money to education to, honey, I think we should move again, fourth time in a year. Yeah, because we got no money for rent. They don't know what admits it, right? To realize consciously, and this is one of the toughest parts, to say, yes, I am so sorry what I did to our family. At that moment, well, my father was, my mother was, I grew up an alcoholic, we had no money, we moved around. Okay. But is that realization going to get you to heaven, so to speak?
Right.
Where is it going to get you when you do the proverbial weighing of the souls at the time of death? Remember the Egyptian image? You put your heart and feather on the scales. It's a beautiful image. There's something utterly profound and deeply moving and spiritual when you say, my God, I did this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you're blaming people? No, I'm not. I don't blame anybody. You look at the dreams and the replicative behavior, replicative cycles. You talk about cycles. The replicative cycles people get into because of the unconscious guilt over what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
You don't walk from this. You don't walk from 20 years of alcohol or somebody that sexually or physically, in other way, abused their son or daughter. You don't walk.
Mm.
And you always will carry it. But the work is to have a conscious understanding of this and say, yeah, I wish to God I could pull it back, but we don't get a second take on that one. We have a take and make a better life, but we cannot redo that scene.
Right. When
those moments, maybe through the drugs or through the alcohol, you enter the kid's room, and terrible things start, At some point, this is a major part of my work, to begin facing I don't even want to call it a shadow. Shadows is too light.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm.
But to face some of these atrocities consciously without any funhouse mirrors and really look into it. Mm-hmm. That's the beginning of this. And that seems to begin to add some fertilizer to the garden for the possibility of the emergence of resilience.
Yes, there has to be some realization of the behavior and the impact, I think, before any healing, can really take place. And as long as we're blaming even our history, as long as we're blaming the alcohol or the drug, I've worked in ministry, now for over 30 years, 35 years, and I've heard every excuse in the book. And I know healing when I see it. And it's only when somebody says, you know what, I can't do, I have to change. I really see now that I've wreaked havoc in my life. And then and only then, I think, is healing really, really possible.
I agree. And the little story goes with that. Mm-hmm. You know Padre Pio? You know Padre Pio?
No.
Padre Pio was a Catholic stigmaticist.
Mm-hmm.
He had, I think, at least a number of the hands, I think, on his side, too, in southern Italy. And anyway, he was not one of these gentle, loving people. And people would line up from all around the world around a monastery where it was, thousands of people waiting to see him. They wait for weeks.
Uh-huh.
And one man waited for 4 or 5 days, and he finally had a time in front of Padre Pio for confession.
Uh-huh.
And Padre Pio had the gift of bilocazione. He was incredibly psychic and ability to be in two places at one time. So this man came, he never met him before. And the man said, Padre Pio, I want your blessings. I want to get to heaven. I want to live a good Christ-like life. And Padre Pio said, again, never met him. He said, excuse me, you're on your knees right now praying for wanting forgiveness after what you did to your wife and kids for 20 years. Get off your knees. If you want to come back here, you come back here and you admit what the hell you did for all these years.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy leaves. He says, oh my God, I met this wonderful saint, like who became a saint, by the way. This Saint Padre Pio, are you kidding me? He's brutal, he's cruel, he's horrible. And he told everybody in line, get off the line, go buy some popcorn, go to a movie. Don't wait for this one. He's terrible. The guy came back a month later, and Padre Pio said, I was waiting for you. I was waiting for you. He said, Father, I'm so sorry. I know I betrayed my wife. I betrayed my kids. And he said, now God will listen to you. You can't come with lies and deceit.
Right.
And it's a powerful story, in terms of a model for us. It's not about the meanest Padre. It's not it. But I think he was giving a lesson saying, you know what? We can't support or just be very so tender to all these denial mechanisms.
Right.
Not that you want to come in a rough way with patients, whatever, or your parishioners, but to be able to hold the mirror and say, I think there's something else we got to do first before this, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I think for true healing to happen, we must be able to hold a mirror. And, as ministers, as teachers, as therapists, as analysts, we have to do it with ourselves first, until we begin to face our own issues, our own, life path. I think, with us asking others to do that, it's so important that we either have done or are continuing. I believe the work is never done, so that we're continuing to look at our own journey and be reflective and try to heal what's in our own path, so that we can really help others. And I do think that's the responsibility of any spiritual teacher, leader, or therapist. Well, the language I use, any therapist or minister worth their salt is going to be sometimes gently, sometimes not so gently, holding the mirror and saying, no, this has to be addressed. For healing and and to move forward. So a lot of what I talk about is the soul evolving. Well, to evolve, there has to be a seeing, there has to be an awareness of what's happened so that a new behavior can come forward. As long as we're in denial about our behavior, what's happened, what we did, our part in it, I think we can never really move forward on the journey. And this is always our goal. Mm-hmm.
I agree 1,000,000%.
Yeah.
1,000,000%. And I think therapy has done some injustice to people.
I agree.
It's because all the because routine, the refrain of because your child, because of this, because of that. Clearly, that's part of it. Clearly.
Mm-hmm.
However, when you look in the mirror, you don't just see your mother and father and then the terrible things that happen. It's always with us. Believe me. I mean, we carry this stuff, the scars and all. However, what have you done with your life then? What have we done with these scars? And Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust, now deceased, he said it's not only about the traumas. Now, he lived through the Holocaust, right?
Wow.
He said, "It's what do we do with this?" And he became a Nobel Prize laureate, and having dedicated his life to human liberations, the liberations of people that are the oppressed. He wrote probably 60, 70 books, operas, arias, and he I don't think he could have done any of that if it wasn't for what he had been through. And somehow he was able to never convert, but to make, and maybe even not make meaning, but somehow be influenced by what he had been through to create something. Something so magnificent.
Yeah, I think there's a way that we learn to carry our story, and I think when we use it to help others heal and to I think it's learning to carry our story, and I think you're absolutely right. And certainly in the denomination, I find myself there's a lot of almost aggressive. I like to call it aggressive positivity, and I'm like, yes, I understand. God is love and light, and we have to look at what's really there. We have to look at, so we've got to really look at what's there before, the healing can take place. So, well, Dr. Conforti, I don't want to stop us on this, but I want to make sure you have time, one, to talk about a little bit of the work you do with dreams, because anytime I bring up that topic, people are very, very interested in dream work. And I know some new programs are starting at Assisi, and I want to give you time to talk about any of the programs. I was thinking of the archetypal pattern analyst program, and there's also a dream pattern analyst as well, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, the Assisi Institute began in Assisi, Italy,
Mm-hmm.
33 years ago. I
Mm-hmm.
made my pilgrimage there because I was deeply affected by the life of St. Francis.
Yeah.
And anyway, is what began there has just spread to being an international community of scholars and interested people. Not scholars like just reading the text, whatever, but people that really care about the presence of spirit and matter.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a training program here, Latin America, and Russia right now. In Australia, we've had seminars where people are training to be archetypal pattern analysts. And there's people from all persuasions. Look at your guitarists, from musicians to filmmakers to ministers to therapists to writers, whatever. Anybody interested in what moves life? Gardeners, landscapers. So it's not training therapists. You can use, if you're a therapist, it's wonderful to use, but there are many ways to apply this work and learning to read patterns. I mean, like growth patterns. You study, I wonder why those tomatoes are doing well, those are not doing well. How come this gardenia that I bought recently, my big gardenia plant, it's dropping the buds, and I'm reading everything I can. I mean, too much water, too little water, but it's learning the patterns of this. So you learn to read the universal patterns of life and the patterns of your boy, his age, and what he's moving through. My boy was going on 29, married now, just thinking about raising a family with his wife, to the patterns as we get older. I'm looking 70 in 2 years. So, so you learn to see what symbols, what behaviors, what tendencies come at these different stages of life. So that's one of the programs. And then, the dream program is we look at the relationship between, this is the key part of it, between a personal rendering of an image and the archetypal.
Yeah.
I mean, very short little example. I mean, let's say you dream of a wine glass, and you come from a background of alcoholics. So for that one person, wine glass, I know what that's about. That's about the horror and the atrocity. Somebody else says, I remember the wonderful times around the family, the dinner table with uncles and aunts drinking wine. And it was celebratory. And so what we have done, unfortunately, is that we take the personal rendering of an image, and that becomes a major thing. Mm-hmm. So if that person said, well, I grew in an alcoholic home, I haven't, but say the patient would say that, then for them, that wine glass would be just symbolic and reminiscent of all those terrible nights and days. And I think Jung will come back, and in our program, we say, okay, look, that's your experience, and we have to talk about it, of course, however long it takes, 1 year, 1 week, 10 years, whatever. But then realize that wine glass was not created to make somebody an alcoholic. It's a container, right, which is part of the image of the chalice, that which holds that which is sacred. Mm-hmm. So a lot of this work is looking at the word ontological, the essence of an image. Mm-hmm. The glass is a container. Looking at the image of shading of a tree, what it's about, and it's really learning about the universality of the images and what is a central meaning of it. Doesn't mean there's one meaning. It's not the point. But sailboats are very different from motorboats, and little boats are different from yachts and ocean liners. They're all different. They all traverse different aspects of the ocean. Some lakes and rivers and ponds, some the great ocean, some can cross transatlantic, and each would be saying something very different. Right. You take a little canoe going across the ocean and say, man, doesn't sound so great. You take the ocean liner or a big boat, you say, at least you got a good shot and you can enjoy the water. So it's really taking the image that seriously.
So it's basically learning to see what specific message the image itself has, an objective viewpoint of the image, because if Psyche's bringing you this certain image at this certain time, then the image is for you and only you. And even though the personal, I mean, I know there is some subjective, as you said, for context, I know, of the image, but it's really looking deeper than that. So we find, why is that image coming to us in this moment? Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the subjective is important. So
Yeah.
if the person says wine glass, I remember all those horrible nights. My
Yeah.
mother and father are under the
Right.
table.
Right.
They fell off the chair. That's huge.
Right.
However, then to realize, that's the thing, that's the core of this program, to realize that, yes, for you, that's huge. But we can't stop there with the work, because
Right.
at some point we have to realize a wine glass is also to contain something that can be celebratory. I mean, it can be, look at the chalice.
Yes, yes. Well, that is great work, Dr. Conforti, that you're doing, and I know you're doing great work at Assisi, and I know that that you are impacting people all over the world, and I know you have. You said your book now is translated into Spanish, isn't it? Spanish and Russian as well, and Italian, right?
It began English, then Italian, then Russian. My 2 books. Russian,
Okay.
English, Italian, now Spanish.
Okay, the book I have is Field, Form, and Fate. Tell our listeners what your other book is, and we'll make
Second
show
one
and
is
put it in
called
the.
Threshold Experiences, the Archetype of Beginning. And it's really interesting stuff. Look at the beginnings of any relationship. And often you see in the beginning stage, I mean, people that are beginning to date or begin an initiative with a partner, and let's buy a house together, do whatever. Look at the opening.
Yeah.
Look at the opening, and you're going to find the story that's already present most likely is, what happens later on. Now, this is tough when you look at relationships and say, why did I acknowledge that in the first 2 dates with them? Oh my God, where the hell was I?
Right. It's
Now
like,
it's clear as a bell.
All right. Well, Dr. Conforti, thank you so much for joining us today. Our mission on our show is really to reawaken consciousness to love, acceptance, and peace. And we do this through the work of the soul. So you do incredible work, I know, all around the world with the Assisi Institute, with your work with individuals one-on-one. So we thank you. We bless you in your work. And we are really honored that you joined us today. So, dear friends, thank you always for joining us on the Authentic Spiritual Journey. And we're so excited with all of our new shows that are coming forward. If you haven't caught our new show yet, The Magnetic Voice, that's happening with Monique McDonald. If you haven't caught yet our show on Real Grief, Real Healing with Mindy Corcoran, please make yourself available to listen to those shows. We're here to support you, to lift you up, and support you on the journey. So many blessings on the journey, dear friend, and we'll see you next week.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey, presented by Natural Awakenings Magazine and Zen Living Realty. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is also made possible through the continued support of our angel patrons, Aggie Payton, Anna Evans, Arlene Meyer, Diana Cox, Leslie Williams, Nora Miles, Peter Gibson, Paul Caswell, Susanna Garcia, and Taryn Tucker. The Authentic Spiritual Journey is copyright 2020, Cynthia Alice Anderson, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission from RR Hot Publishing. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is a production of 818 Studios.